Hi again. When we left off our last lecture, we very briefly discussed the origins of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, Mahayana Buddhism arose from the Abhidharma schools, which were concerned with two major philosophical issues. Now, as I mentioned in the last lecture, these philosophical issues include the nature of things of this world, as well as the nature of consciousness and knowledge of this world. So it deals with both the nature of the things that we have in this world, as well as our understanding of these things. Now, Mahayana Buddhism, otherwise known as the Great Vehicle, has schools which teach the elements of the world that are empty of their own being. This emptiness becomes a huge aspect of Mahayana Buddhism, and we'll talk more about this as we go on throughout the lecture and in the subsequent lectures. So what I mean by they are empty of any own being is that they exist only in the dependent arising of existence. So as we mentioned in the previous lecture, this dependent arising comes about through originally from ignorance, and that ignorance grows and grows and grows and keeps on that cycle of life, death, and rebirth, otherwise known as samsara. So this teaching, this great vehicle of Mahayana, teaches that there is a base consciousness that can contain the seeds of good and bad actions, and these actions conditions one's experience in life. So how you understand the world and understand reality can motivate you into either the wholesome path or the unwholesome path. Now, the school of Mahayana was founded by a monk named Nagarjuna. And you can see a picture of him here in this slide here. This is actually interestingly enough, this is a Buddhist monastery in Scotland, and a friend of mine who I did my PhD with, she did a lot of her research here in Sami Lang Buddhist Center in Scotland. That's where I got my PhD, is in University of Edinburgh. And it's very interesting to see how a Buddhist influence can have such a strong impact in places all around the world, including Scotland. Go figure. But nevertheless, Nagarjuna taught that people are caught in this suffering and samsaric chain of rebirth because of the power of karma that arises from certain unwholesome thoughts, words, and deeds that are motivated by certain mental dispositions. These are certain mental defilements, if you want to call it that. And people misconceive the world and its true nature. And their wrong views lead them to misbehave in ways that tend to bind them to this life of suffering. And their existence, their movement, their action, and the perceptions all take place because of the relational matrix that is dependent on this understanding of dependent arising. So we'll go more in depth with this understanding as we move forward through this lecture. So let's begin here by talking about the relationship that exists between wisdom and emptiness, this notion of emptiness. And as I just mentioned, being dependently arisen, all phenomena are empty of their own being, or of any sort of essence that connect one to one's understanding of how they exist. So their characteristics, their understanding of personality, of all these different traits that we like to think of ourselves that make us who we are or make reality what it is, are indeed empty of true substance. They are an illusion. So if you have insight into this emptiness, one can then escape suffering. So insight and emptiness are linked together. So as you see here in the quote here, we declare that whatever is dependent arising is emptiness. So anything that comes out there that makes whatever is conjured up in our brains about what reality is indeed false. And once we realize that that all those things are indeed empty, we understand the true nature of all reality. That it is devoid of all these characteristics, and it has a base level of understanding of reality that exists in the world. We also see in the second quote here that the ignorant person creates mental formations which are the source of samsara. While the ignorant person does so, the wise person does not, because of his or her seeing the truth. So again, our attachment to these understandings of what we perceive of reality, our attachments to thinking of that these characteristics are indeed the truth and that this is the essence of what it is, these attachments keep us attached to this life of suffering. And by attaching ourselves to this life, then we continue that life of cycle of life, death, and rebirth over and over again, continuing that suffering from one lifetime to the next. So wisdom sees the truth of emptiness. And through wisdom, we can then be revealed that the many mental and physical elements are indeed empty of their substantial independence. So they are indeed not separate, but in actuality they are connected, interconnected with everything. So things don't have specific characteristics. They are indeed one, and that unites the entire universe. So emptiness is not necessarily a bleak or depressing understanding of how reality works. It's actually a beautiful way of looking at how everything works and ties together, because in all, we are all empty. And if we are all empty, we are everything. So what then is emptiness? Is it a separate plane of existence, like a realm of heaven, if you want to call it that, where you get to that point and then you realize that you're nothing? Well, no. It's not really a thing. It's more of an understanding of how reality is, that we are indeed nothing. We are empty of our independence or our understanding that we are separate entities from everything else. So it's not necessarily a separate plane of existence, and to think of it as an entity would also be a misunderstanding as well, because it would therefore become a type of or it would have a certain substantial identity in its own self, which is counterintuitive to emptiness, right? So it's not a plane, it's not a thing, it's a reality. It's a understanding of truth. So therefore people cannot really adhere to a view of emptiness. They have to become empty. They have to realize emptiness in everything. And one of my favorite examples of this comes from the movie Star Wars. Now, when Obi-Wan Kenobi was going against Darth Vader, this is in the original episode 4 of Star Wars, when the two are battling off, and Darth Vader is about to strike down Obi-Wan Kenobi. And just before he strikes him down, Obi-Wan Kenobi says something that's quite strange, and what happens after that is even stranger. He says, "You can strike me down, but when you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you could ever possibly imagine." And then he gets struck down. But after he gets struck down, he doesn't like turn into, he doesn't get chopped up into bits and pieces. He doesn't explode in a mystic aura. What does he do? He becomes nothing. Kind of an interesting way of looking at it, right? That when you are most powerful is when you are in or at one with everything, with the force, if you want to call it that. You become one with everything, or you realize that you already are one with everything. You let go of your physical attachments and you become one with the force, or you become one with reality. And when you do that, you become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. So there are not really two different types of realities. So there's no separation between the samsaric life, which continues life, death, and rebirth, and the reality of nirvana. No, they are indeed one. There's only the field of emptiness that is experienced through ignorance and unwholesome mental formation, otherwise known as samsara. And then there's also wisdom, which is known as nirvana. So with wisdom, one is able to penetrate the ultimate truth of emptiness. And then is able to detach from both the world and nirvana. And in doing so, they become free to have compassion, to address the needs of all living beings, because they ultimately are a part of all living beings, because they realize that everything is connected. And when you are connected to everything, you are connected to life itself. Next, let's talk about the nature of truth. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, there are two basic understandings of truth. There's conventional truth, and then there's ultimate truth. Now, conventional truth is things that are experienced by the ordinary perceptions and your own conception of how things work. So you realize that, say, fire is hot, or something moves, or who a person is. These are things that this is conventional truth. This is what you can experience and understand from that notion of perception and conception. Ultimate truth, on the other hand, realizes that all things are empty of own being or are dependently arisen. This is the ultimate truth that exists out there. There are two different caveats. So either all things are empty, or if something comes into being, it's as a result of becoming dependently arisen. Now, that doesn't mean that conventional truth is unnecessary, because there's almost like a process or progression that exists within our understanding. In order to understand ultimate truth, you have to basically understand conventional truth. So, ultimate truth does not necessarily deny conventional truth. It simply reveals the true nature of what one knows at the conventional level of truth. So this progression starts off with first one gaining the understanding of how things work in the world. The things and processes of how the ordinary world works together in a more conventional way. Then once you gain this understanding, one's able to gain wisdom and see emptiness of all things and possessions. So when you understand how this works, that all things, all processes, all understandings how the world work are indeed empty and are a result of dependent arising, then you can then understand ultimate truth. Now, once you have ultimate truth, you can still experience these conventional truths about the world, whether it's regarding heat, movement, or identity. But although you experience this, you realize that through your understanding of ultimate truth and the truth of emptiness, one is then able to re-envision the ordinary world so that one is no longer attached to the things in a way that generates suffering for yourself or for others. So this is kind of similar to the way that Neo in The Matrix. I know I talk about The Matrix a lot, so if you have never seen the movie, I suggest you watch it. The whole series. It's a trilogy. So in I think it's the second movie of The Matrix, Neo is able to experience that understanding of ultimate truth while still experiencing conventional truth at the same time. So this is why he's able to go in there and stop bullets as they're fired at him, realize that these are just conventional truths and that ultimately they're just empty and they don't really matter. And he's able to change these things based off of ultimate truth, ultimate understanding. So going back to this quote here, without relying on convention, the ultimate truth cannot be expressed. Without understanding the ultimate truth, nirvana cannot be attained. So you need conventional truth to gain ultimate truth. And then when you experience ultimate truth, you still understand conventional truth, but at a different level. Let's now talk about the womb of the Buddha. Now, I'm not talking about the idea that the Buddha actually has a womb. That's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this notion of Tathagata Garbha. This understanding of Tathagata Garbha is the essence of having a womb or an embryo growing within you. And what we're talking about here is the notion that all living beings have the potential to become, or already are, the Buddha. So all living beings already possess this innate essence of Buddhahood. They just don't ordinarily realize that fact. So the Buddha is already a part of us. We are already the Buddha. We just haven't realized it yet. And the reason why we haven't realized it is because we have all these unwholesome mental formations which conceal the truth. This is kind of like a rag that covers over the Buddha statue. It's not until you reveal it, then you actually can see that the Buddha is actually there inside of you. So we have all these rags over our own understanding of who we are, our true nature of reality, our own Buddhahood is covered up by all these attachments that we have. And it's not until we can remove all that muck, all that clutter away, that we can then understand the brilliance that is already within us, that we are indeed already embodying the essence of Buddhahood. Which is interesting. This is a very controversial way of looking at it, especially way back when this concept was first coming into fruition, because this refuted some of the claims that there were some cursed ones that exist in society, or those who are unable to reach this level of understanding. So this particularly targets certain lower castes, and even including women who may not be able to be perceived as reaching this level of enlightenment. Once you realize that we all have this innate quality within us, then it's an equal playing field. This is a very egalitarian understanding of how the nature of all existence is, that there isn't a higher or lower person, that we are all capable of reaching that Buddhahood within us because we are already there. And that all these concepts of higher and lower caste or higher and lower people in this world is just, again, an illusion. Because all of that is boiling down to who we truly are, which is empty. So once one is free from all these defilements, the Buddhahood shines forth with pure qualities. And this is seen as a positive addition to the notion of emptiness. And you can see here in this quote here, if it did not exist in all beings, there would be no disgust with dukkha, no wish for nirvana, no striving for Buddhahood, no resolve to gain for the benefit of all beings. So if we weren't capable of recognizing that we are all suffering, that we actually do suffer, and we have a sincere desire to remove ourselves from the suffering, then if we realize we all have that, then we all realize that we all have the innate qualities to overcome that. And that is the Buddha trying to shine forth within us and try to reach our true understanding of reality. This then leads us to the notion of a storehouse consciousness. Now, the storehouse consciousness, for me, the metaphor gets a bit fuzzy, the way that it's explained. But I'll do my best to try to clarify what is meant by this storehouse consciousness. Now, the storehouse consciousness is a way of explaining how the karmic seeds are then cultivated from the process of conscious experience. So we have these experiences that we have in our lives, and the storehouse is a representation of how karma works in the world. So we have more positive attributes or wholesome acts, wholesome seeds, and then you also have more negative dispositions or negative seeds. And it's important within the storehouse consciousness to develop more pure seeds, more wholesome seeds, to allow us to gain a greater ability to grow in our depth of achieving Buddhahood. So negative dispositions such as hatred, greed, and ignorance condition future experiences within that storehouse. It kind of puts a rot maybe on the surface level of the storehouse. But what's important really is the pure seeds, which are down deep, that are protected, if you will, down lower in the bottom. And these pure seeds are influenced by the positive aspects of your life. So you should try to cultivate these pure seeds as opposed to the negative or the impure seeds, because these can affect one's future experience. Now, the better way of explaining this understanding, in my opinion, is through the understanding of how water works, especially in an ocean. So one way of explaining the storehouse consciousness is thusly. So in this quote here, the mode of nature of this Buddha is emptiness, which is the status of reality. This is because the storehouse consciousness is like a great ocean in which the waves roll on constantly, but the depths subsist unaffected, free from the faults of impermanence, thoroughly pure in essence. The storehouse consciousness is thus known by the name of Tathagata Garbha. So the inner essence of the mind is the pure or original or luminous and nirvanic state. It's our nature that is the Buddha nature that is in that storehouse consciousness that is beyond the dualistic description of the ordinary mental functioning. So all that is like the surface level, the waves that we tend to focus all of our attention on. But down deep, deep under that surface, under all that calamity that happens up there, you have peace. And there's a sense of calm down below that surface chaos. And that within that inner realization, that is where you find that embryonic Buddhahood And that's where it can develop, in that peace and in that tranquility within the storehouse consciousness, where that's able to develop and grow and is roughly unaware of what's happening at that surface level, because all that is really frivolous information. In essence, what's most important is the quality and the nature of what is actually happening. What is actually all that a part of? It is water. So whether it's up at the top all ruffled up or at the bottom where it's calm, it's still, in essence, the same thing. And that is kind of a peaceful way of looking at it. That we all have the ability to get down into that Buddhahood and understand a sense of calm and peace that is unaffected by the roll and tumble of the waves up on top. Since the title of this lecture is Mahayana Sutras, it's probably a good idea to introduce a couple of sutras that exist within the Mahayana practice, or the Mahayana school. The first one I'll talk about is the Heart Sutra. It's one of the more famous sutras that's out there. And this sutra takes the vantage point of the Bodhisattva. And from this vantage point, everything is empty. So this sutra in particular talks about the emptiness of reality. And everything is the same because it's all characterized by emptiness. So let's read here. Om. So just a little side note here. Om and the words that are used within the sutras that were recited aloud. Words were considered to be divine or spiritually important. So even the word Om is a representative of this connective tissue that exists within all of creation. So Om is kind of setting the right mood here. It's kind of saying these are divine words. Or Om, praise to the blessed and noble perfection of wisdom. The noble Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva was moving in the deep journey of the perfection of wisdom. When he looked down at the five aggregates, he saw that they are all empty of own being. Here, O Sariputra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. What is form is emptiness, and what is emptiness is form. The same is true for sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. All dharmas are characterized by emptiness. They are neither produced nor cease. They are neither defiled nor pure. They are neither deficient nor complete. Now the text goes on to look at the wisdom of realizing emptiness over the five aggregates, the six sensations, the elements that constitute conscious experience, the 12 stages of dependent arising, the four noble truths, and the knowledge that comes from monks. In the end, the primary message that gets across is that all of these things are empty of own being. The next sutra I'd like to discuss is known as a layperson's sutra. And in it, it tells the story of this rich layperson whose understanding of the Buddha's teaching was so deep that even the bodhisattvas had come down to visit him. So this goes to show that all this knowledge and understanding does not have to necessarily come from monks. It also can come from lay people as well. That's another important message that comes from this, and realizing that it's not a hierarchical system here, and it feeds into this theme of emptiness. So this sutra presents again that doctrine of emptiness that's so important within Mahayana Buddhism. So in it, it states that emptiness is not an imperceptible causal force like a god. Instead, emptiness is that hidden suchness of all things one ordinarily experiences with a discriminating mind. So, having that sense of discrimination is almost a setback for understanding the true understanding of reality. So, the dualities of self and other, object and perception, purity and defilement, samsara and nirvana don't exist. There aren't two separate things. Again, it goes back into that understanding of emptiness, that they are all indeed nothing. And the discriminating mind cannot see the reality that lies beyond all of its discriminations. So in this story, it talks about this example of the Buddha who's meditating with his disciples, and as he's meditating under this tree, the flowers of this tree begin to come down, and as they fall on the Buddha as well as the disciples, the flowers would just kind of ricochet off and be deflected off of the body of the Buddha. But for the disciples, they were clinging to their bodies, and it seemed like it was impossible to get rid of them. They were kept on clinging to them, and despite their best efforts, they could not remove these flower petals. And this goddess who was watching what was happening asked the disciples, why were they trying to shake off all these petals? And the disciple, or one of the disciples, responded by saying, it's because these flower petals are not the status of suchness. So he's saying, look, I know so much, and these flower petals are just an illusion. And the goddess replied, do not say that the flowers are not the status of suchness, because it is you who have given rise to such discrimination. But if you no longer make such discriminations, this will all be of the status of suchness. So in essence, if you realize that they are all one and you are all one, then there is no differentiation between the flower petals and yourself. And she goes on to say that, look at the bodhisattva whose bodies do not hold the flowers. That is because they have put an end to such discrimination. It's the discrimination that we perceive of one thing being separate from another, whether it's the body from the flower petals, or for ourselves and reality itself. In essence, they're not two different things. They're not separate. They are the same. And the more we realize they're the same, the more all these little things don't affect us. So the flower petals will ricochet because that represents the level of separation. They're not the same, but they're not different as well. They're just a part of reality, and you are a part of reality. And once you realize that, then they don't affect you at all. This next story from the Layperson Sutra looks at the nature of gender and the importance of gender within the understanding of reality and the frivolousness of gender, or understanding gender. It starts off by saying here, talking about Sariputra. And Sariputra is this common character within a lot of these sutras, and it represents this kind of somewhat ignorant person who's trying to gain the path of enlightenment, who thinks that they know more than they actually do, but they're still gaining knowledge and understanding as they go on. So Sariputra is kind of like us, if you want to call it that. So Sariputra asked, why do you not change your female form? By the way, he's talking to this goddess who's gained a certain understanding or status of achievement of karmic state. So he says, "Why do you not change your female form?" And the goddess replied, for the last 12 years, I have been looking in vain for a female form. So what is it that you want me to change?" Thereupon, she used her supernatural powers to change Sariputra into a celestial goddess, and then changed herself into a man similar to Sariputra. She then asked him, "Why do you not change your female form?" The goddess said, "Like Sariputra, who is not a woman but only appears in female form, all women are the same. Though they appear in female form, they are ultimately not women. Hence, the Buddha said, all things ultimately are neither male or female." So apparently, Sariputra didn't really get the first point about not discriminating. And he is himself, again, discriminating a man's body as being superior to a woman's body. And the goddess points out that his attachment to the male gender is inhibiting his understanding of reality, and chides him for not realizing that the suchness of all forms is the same. Now, awakening to this truth about the ultimate sameness of all things is open to everyone, male or female, lay or monastic. And that's the beauty of this message. It's for all people. And it realizes that we are indeed all the same. We are all equal. And we are all capable of reaching or understanding that sameness, that suchness, that truth of reality, which is, in essence, our own Buddhahood. The next sutra I want to discuss is known as the Lotus Sutra. And it's one of those also very famous sutras that's found within Buddhism. And this sutra in particular really took hold within the Pure Land understanding of Buddhism. So the Pure Land school really focuses heavily on this Lotus Sutra. And the Lotus Sutra explains that there are different methods of teaching the message to people in various states of openness. So it realizes that there are different understandings of people and different places that they may be in their lives. And that it's important to also realize that everyone is capable of reaching Buddhahood or understanding Buddhahood. And that path may come from different avenues and different ways, depending on one's situation. And the way that this is kind of epitomized is through the parable of the burning house. Now, this parable describes a man who has a house with many children, but there's only one door. Then all of a sudden, this house catches fire on all sides. And he's outside, and his children are inside. And he calls to them, telling them of the fire, but they're all way too consumed in their own playing that they don't even notice the fire, and they're not even afraid. They have no desire to leave the house, even though the house is about to consume them in flames. So then the man, knowing that his children are too overwhelmed or consumed in their own trivial pursuits of playing, he tells them that they all have these great toys outside, and if they come outside, he'll give them whatever they want. And this catches their attention, and they all go outside. And when they all come out, he gives them all one toy equally, and each is spectacular. So this metaphor here, this parable, explains how we tend to be ignorant, and we are not recognizing the fire that's consuming all around us, that's potentially dooming us in our everyday lives, and we need this bodhisattva or a Buddha outside of us to help call us to that. Call us outside of that house. And once we can get outside of that house, we realize where we actually were. But in doing so, we gain a great gift. And that gift is spectacular. Now, I mentioned before the correlation between the Lotus Sutra and Pure Land Buddhism. And that relationship is really solidified through the understanding of the Amitabha Buddha, or sometimes called as Amida Buddha. And Amida Buddha is also was considered to be this bodhisattva who is called Dharmakara. And he was a bodhisattva from eons ago who knew that the Buddha and Buddhas in general had certain powers. And with those powers, they had the ability to create certain Buddha realms in the heavens where they can then reside in like kind of like a spiritual or mental capacity, that they can reside and kind of enrich their Buddhahood. Now, with the help of the living Buddha at the time, he created his own Buddha realm that would combine all the excellent qualities in the purest of Buddha realms. It was devoid of all distractions and was pretty much there to really facilitate understanding the nature of Buddhahood so that one can eventually gain enlightenment. So now Dharmakara is known as Amitabha Buddha. And that land of bliss is known as the Pure Land. This is where that Pure Land Buddhism comes into play here. So it involves the creation of this Buddha realm, and the saving grace of the Amida Buddha is for the birth of for rebirth into this land of bliss. So there are different beliefs about how one is able to be born or reborn into this land of bliss. The first is that it requires a sense of faith and desire to get to that point, get to that state. And the other is that beliefs or other beliefs that one must generate the thought of becoming a Buddha and the ability to cultivate certain values and chant homage to the Amitabha Buddha. So it's a way of kind of prepping yourself. It's almost like a purgatory, if you want to call it that, where you can, if you have a sincere desire to reach enlightenment, you can then focus your faith and focus your attention on the Amida Buddha, and in doing so, you will be reborn into this pure land, which allows you to focus all your efforts in that time to reach enlightenment. So let's read a little bit about this land of bliss. This land of bliss, Ananda, which is the realm of the Lord Amitabha, is rich and prosperous, comfortable, fertile, delightful, and full of many gods and people. In this realm, Ananda, there are no hells, no animals, no ghosts or asuras, no inauspicious place to be reborn. That realm of the land of bliss, Ananda, produced many fragrant odors, is rich in the variety of flowers and fruits, adorned with jeweled trees, which are visited by flocks of different kinds of birds, conjured up by the Buddha's miraculous power. On all sides it is surrounded by golden nets, and covered by lotus flowers, which made of precious things. If any beings, Ananda, over and over reverently devotes themselves to this Buddha, if they plant a large root of goodness, have raised their thoughts to awakening, If they vow to be born in that realm, then when the hour of their death approaches, Amitabha, Buddha, will stand before them, surrounded by the host of monks. Then, having seen that Lord, having died with serene hearts, they will be born in precisely that realm of the land of bliss. Kind of a very nice way to think about going into the next life. Maybe if you haven't reached enlightenment in this lifetime, you have the potential to reach enlightenment in the next if you focus all of your faith and energy to reaching Amida Buddha, or reaching the Pure Land through faith in Amida Buddha in the next life. So it's also important to note that the practice of remembering the Buddha's name, so which is popular within Mahayana Buddhism. So a lot of times remembering that Buddha's name, and you do that by saying the word Nama, which literally means hail to, and then add the name of the Buddha. So you can either say Nama Buddha, or Nama Amida Buddha, or Nama Amitabha Buddha. But Nama Buddha is a way of kind of hailing to, and if you do that, you're kind of invoking this sense of austerity and goodness within yourself, and because you're allowing yourself to focus on the good aspects of your life, and through that contemplative focus and energy, you can then be reborn in the Pure Land. So that's the Pure Land understanding.